The trapdoor slammed and Edith Thompson fell. The scream that ripped from her throat bounced off the bare walls of the execution shed at Holloway Prison. Instead of the quick, terrible stillness that hangmen expected, her body convulsed at the end of the rope, jerking so violently that witnesses flinched and looked away. The winter air inside the shed felt colder for it, breath hanging, boots shifting on damp concrete, the rope creaking as the seconds dragged. It was January 9th, 1923, in London, and a 30-year-old woman was dying on a gallows not for wielding a knife, but for words written to a lover that a court said made her a murderer. Edith Jessie Graydon had been born in East London in 1893 and raised to keep up appearances, church dress pressed, manners checked, ambitions kept small. She was bright, quick with conversation, and eager for more than the narrow rhythm of Ilford streets. At 20, she married Percy Thompson, a reliable shipping clerk several years older. They settled into a modest house and the quiet comfort of routine. To neighbors, the marriage looked sound. Inside those walls, it frayed. Edith wanted romance and movement. Percy, by most accounts, wanted order and respect. The distance between those wants grew year by year. In 1920, a young merchant seaman named Frederick Bywaters entered the picture. He was 6 years younger, animated, and easy to like. He and Edith fell into an affair that burned fast and deep, sustained by long absences at sea and long letters sent between ports and Ilford. Over the next 2 years, she wrote more than 60 letters, pouring out the details of her unhappiness, her fantasies of running away, and her anger at a marriage she felt was strangling her. In those letters, she imagined Percy dead, sometimes by illness, sometimes by poison slipped into food or medicine, sometimes by vague accidents. There is no proof she ever tried to poison him, and some of the wilder claims read like melodrama on the page. But the words existed, line after line, and in time they would be read to strangers in a courtroom. The night that shattered 3 lives began like any other evening out. On October 3rd, 1922, Edith and Percy took in a play in the West End and returned late to Ilford by train. They walked the short distance home under weak street lamps, turning onto Belgrave Road. From behind a hedge, Bywaters lunged. He and Percy struggled in close quarters. A knife flashed. Edith cried out, grabbing and pulling, but the blows came fast. Neighbors, startled by shouts, spilled into the street. Percy staggered and fell. He bled out within minutes on the pavement, while Edith pleaded for help, and Bywaters vanished into the dark. Police followed a straight trail. Bywaters was found with cuts from the fight and arrested within hours. He admitted the stabbing and insisted he alone had acted, in anger, without any plan shared with Edith. Then detectives found the letters. The Crown now held a stack of pages in which Edith raged at her life and imagined her husband's death. Those pages rewired the case from a sudden street killing to an alleged conspiracy. The trial opened at the Old Bailey in December 1922 and drew crowds that wrapped around the block. The press christened it the Ilford Murder and printed every scrap of scandal. The prosecution's story was simple and powerful. Edith's letters showed intent. Bywaters carried out her wishes. One by one, prosecutors read passages aloud, lines about poison, about wanting freedom at any cost, about a future with the sailor. The defense reminded jurors that there was no physical evidence of poison, no witness to any plot, and repeated Bywaters' insistence that Edith had never asked him to kill. But in that room, the letters were louder than doubt. Presentation mattered. Bywaters, barely 20, spoke plainly and shouldered blame for the stabbing, telling the court again and again that Edith had no part in planning it. Edith unraveled under the pressure. She fainted. She sobbed. She was carried from the dock and brought back, pale and shaking. To some jurors and many reporters, her emotions looked theatrical, the performance of a woman who had manipulated a younger man, and now feared the swing of the rope. The climate outside the courtroom was no easier. In post-war Britain, a married woman's affair branded her immoral. Writing out fantasies of her husband's death branded her dangerous. On December 11th, the jury returned guilty verdicts for both. Shock hit the gallery. Cries rose from the floor. Edith collapsed. Bywaters called out that she was innocent. Appeals were filed. Petitions for mercy gathered thousands of signatures, arguing that letters, however shameful, should not decide a life. The Home Secretary rejected them. The sentences stood. Hangings were set for the same morning in different prisons. Bywaters at Pentonville, Edith at Holloway. Execution day broke gray and raw. At Pentonville, warders reported a calm prisoner. Bywaters walked to the drop, repeating that Edith had known nothing of his plan. At Holloway, Edith could barely stand. Witnesses later said she was carried or half-dragged to the scaffold, hysterical and shaking. When the lever was pulled, the scene that followed rattled hardened officials. Convulsions tore through her body. The execution was over in minutes, as the long drop method was designed to be, but those minutes were enough to leave several who had watched vowing never to attend another hanging of a woman. The country split along harsh lines. Many saw justice. A husband was dead. The lovers had to pay. Others saw something uglier. A woman executed not for acts, but for adulterous letters that prosecutors had treated as blueprints. Even Bywaters' final insistence that she was innocent of plotting failed to dent the verdict. In the weeks after the hangings, editorials asked whether imagination, put to paper, should ever be read as intent. Families in Ilford closed their curtains and tried to return to ordinary life. The story refused to fade. In the years that followed, the case became a touchstone in arguments over capital punishment, gender, and proof. Lawyers and historians combed the record. They noted the absence of a distress call for help during the attack that could suggest foreknowledge and the presence of letters that could suggest planning. They observed that the letters also contained transparent fantasy and that no poison had ever been found. They debated how much the culture of the day had shaped the outcome. A woman punished for sexual transgression, a jury eager to see corruption behind tears, a press that sold papers by turning private writing into public scandal. Edith Thompson was not granted a late legal vindication in her own time. Her name, however, kept returning whenever people argued that words should not be treated as deeds. The image that stuck was not the courtroom drawing of a schemer, but the human moment in the shed at Holloway, the panic, the violence of the body at the end of the rope, and the fact that everyone present was changed by watching it. It is the kind of moment that forces a hard question. What did justice require in 1923, and what did the state actually do? A century later, the case still pulls at people who study the border between thought and action. The facts remain fixed. A husband killed on a quiet London street, a young seaman who admitted the stabbing and swung for it, and a woman whose private letters to that seaman were read as a map to murder. What those facts mean depends on who is reading them. For some, they tell a story of guilt shared in different ways. For others, they show how easily a courtroom can turn fantasy into intent when a defendant's life does not fit the era's rules. Either way, Edith Thompson's execution stands as one of the most argued-over moments in British criminal justice, not because her name is famous, but because her death forces anyone who hears it to decide what evidence should be enough to take a life. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.